The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to Coffee and Comics, part of the Secrets of Movies and TV Shows podcast. And we'll be talking about superhero movies and the great comic book stories they adapt. I'm Thomas Salerno, and I'm joined on the panel tonight by David Handlos. Hi, David.
Hello.
And by Patrick Mason. Hello, Patrick.
Hey, Tom.
And Andrew Hermiz. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And be sure to follow our show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice. And you can find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or on Twitter, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And please do us a favor by sharing this podcast with your friends or any other comic book geeks out there who will want to tune in to our discussions. And I thought for our inaugural episodes, we would start by talking about the state of the major comic book movie franchises. And that'll kind of give us a baseline, good baseline for all our discussions moving forward. So tonight, we will be discussing about the state of the DC Extended Universe. Although, are they still calling it that, guys? Or have they changed the name on us?
Who knows?
Yeah. I believe it's just DC Universe now.
Okay.
They could have called it Guns Galaxy for all I would have known.
Right, yeah.
Oh.
But before we get into all that, I want to go around the panel and just have us quickly each introduce ourselves as, like, how would you say, give our cred as comic book geeks. You know, just introduce ourselves and say, who we are, what's our favorite comic book character or storyline, or what's your favorite comic book movie. Andrew, let's begin with you. What's your favorite superhero or comic book movie?
Oh, favorite superhero, I mean, it has to be Batman. I just grew up loving that character. I mean, Spider-Man and Batman were the first comics I really got into as a child, and Batman's kind of the one that stuck with me the most. And, as far as my street cred,
Page cred?
Yeah.
Page cred, yeah.
Page cred,
panel
exactly.
cred.
My panel cred. I mean, I live in San Diego. I've gone to San Diego Comic-Con. I think this will be like my 7th or 8th year in a row going. But I mean, other than that, I've just been a lover of comic books. I was a lover of them as a child, and then I kind of found that love again in college when I read The Watchmen for the first time. I'm going to Comic-Con again this year, so it hasn't, and I'm on this podcast, so it hasn't changed for me. The best Batman comic for me is Dark Knight Returns. I mean, it's a classic. It's probably a stereotypical answer, but I mean, it's a stereotype for a reason. That, and if you were to ask me my favorite DC comics, it would be that and Watchmen, like 1 and 2, I guess. Obviously, when the Dark Knight trilogy came out, it just boosted that sort of love I had for the character and the love I have for comic book movies. So that's if I had to answer that, that's what I have to offer.
Nice. And what about you, Patrick? Our listeners can't see, but you are wearing a Superman shirt. Can I assume that Superman is one of your favorite characters?
Yeah, so I have different answers depending on what point in my life we're talking.
Yeah.
When I started collecting comics as a kid, it was about the artwork for me. It was not about the story. And so, like, having known some cover artists, going to conventions and stuff, and meeting them, it's interesting because the artwork they do is so different a lot than what's in the books themselves. But that's really what drew me in. And my absolute favorite comic book character from when I was a kid was Iron Man. And it was because, like, I've always been kind of an engineer nerd. And it's just such an engineer nerd character. and
yeah.
Like
yes.
The artwork around him is just so engineer nerd, little kid dreaming up all these weird stuff that you could ever come up with, spaceman suit sort of stuff. And that was Iron Man for me. And it honestly wasn't really until close to college when I started actually really reading these books that I was collecting and realized, oh hey, there's like storylines and they go from book to book. And I would say at that point was right around Death of Superman. And I got real into Superman. And really he is the only DC character I have any number of comics for. And it all revolves around that. It all revolves around the Death of Superman, and before and after, and all. There was a huge crossover event, and they had all the comics. That was big for me, and so that became my favorite. And that's been my favorite on the DC side forever. As far as the movies go, Iron Man still stands as number one for me, and it was kind of this weird, because he's not like a mainline Marvel figure. Prior to the movies, it's always Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and whatnot. They got the movies, right? The Sony pictures. And Iron Man was just sort of this weird, kind of cult following. And then the movie was just so huge. And Robert Downey Jr. was such an excellent choice for it. So, but yeah, those have been my big ones, I think. And I still love Superman because he's just such a stand-up guy, like through and through. Him and Captain America. They're just stand-up guys. They just are.
Oh yeah, and we'll definitely have more to say about Superman later tonight, given DC's plans for him. But David, what about you? Where are you coming from in terms of comic books?
I'm coming from, let's see here, nerd page, whatever cred you call it. I'm born and raised in the middle of Kansas, and I moved to part of Nebraska, so I didn't really move that far. So comic books was my first look at I didn't know what actual cities were. I just looked at comics and figured that's what they looked like. I didn't really get into really hardcore into comics until, around the death of Superman, just right around the death of Superman, which is, early 90s-ish. And I always liked movies. Probably the first two, Superman 1 and 2 with Christopher Reeve is probably going to be, Superman isn't like my favorite, but that was just like, I could just watch Superman 1. Just sit down and watch that original one and just sit down and watch it and listen to that music. The kid in me just loves that movie. But as far as just like on the comics, like Death of Superman was the first one I'm going to stick with DC. Once I started collecting comics, I have my collection spans Marvel, DC, and several others ever since. And then when I got older, I couldn't afford those anymore. So that's why trade paperbacks exist. My favorite is as far as like once I read The Death of Superman, I read the follow-up. There was a storyline called Funeral for a Friend, where it introduced all these other comic book heroes that paid respects and their respects and all this stuff. I'm like, who are these guys? So then I started reading previous things. One of my favorite, if I just want to have a good laugh, I will read the Justice League comic books, not from what most people think of as Justice League, but there's a Justice League era from the 80s. Which is just basically, it's half screwball comedy, which is before which is, where was there Green Lantern? There was Green Lantern and there was Batman, but it wasn't the Green Lantern that most people know. He was a loudmouth who would shoot off his ring just as for anything. There was guys like, there was a Green Lantern named Guy Gardner. There was Blue Beetle. There was Booster Gold. There was, Batman was in there for a little bit, and there was Martian Manhunter, and they would more than likely destroy the building they were trying to save, just because they were not getting along. There was one of the very first storylines is still I have it collected because it's one of my even Batman finally loses his cool with Guy Gardner and just finally just challenges him just to shut him up and just knocks him out with one punch. It's one of my favorite lines. Are just cold cocks him and he's out. And then everyone just sitting there and no one comes to his rescue. No one's worried about this, if he's hurt or not. They just go off to the other room and start talking about something else. So that's my favorite, just for some fun. But I guess the ones I've been reading the most lately are the current DC comics. Don't do too much about it. There's something called the Justice Society that the Black Adam movie talked about a little bit. But I started collecting a lot of the old school Justice Society things because those are heroes from the 40s on up. And some of them they're fun and they're at the same time so ridiculous that they're just a blast. If anyone out there hasn't heard of this guy before, he's not in any of the movies, probably will never be. There's a hero from the 40s called Our Man, and there's a version of him that still exists today. where his whole shtick is that he's a very talented chemist who developed a drug that can give him superpowers for an hour. Basically, he's a couple levels above Captain America. He can bench press a car, he's bulletproof, all that stuff, but only for an hour, which doesn't sound that weird, but it's only for an hour, and he names himself Hour Man. That's like Superman calling himself Kryptonite Guy. Like, it's putting your weakness right there. And it's just all these weird challenges, like, oh no, they figured out that I only have 59 minutes left. So, long story short, I've been reading comics way too long.
Yeah, like for me, I've been a fan of these characters pretty much for as long as I can remember. I grew up on Batman the Animated Series and all its, spin-offs, Superman, Batman Beyond, the Justice League. And I remember at my local library, so there's this book publisher called DK, and they used to publish like all these like guidebooks to the different superheroes. And my local library had them. And I would just go, even though I wasn't reading the comics at the time, there wasn't really a comic book shop near me. I would just go and rent these books out of the library. They were basically encyclopedias of superheroes. And I would read them cover to cover until I had just absorbed all of these random facts about these characters without having read any of their storylines. Like, I knew all this stuff. And like, once I was in high school, I started I started reading some of the trade paperbacks. And I remember the first one I picked up was Batman No Man's Land.
Yes.
It's still my favorite.
Hell yeah.
To this very day is Batman No Man's Land. Basically, long story short is Gotham City is almost completely destroyed by an earthquake. The government decides we are tired of rebuilding this town all the time. We're going to cut it off from the United States. And they put like the National Guard around it. They cut it. They give everyone a few weeks to get out. And if you're not out by that time, you are stuck in the city with all of the supervillains and all this stuff. And Batman and the police take back the city like over the course of a year, block by block. And it's still my favorite Batman story. I would love to see it adapted as like an HBO Max show or something. Like, that would be just amazing. But like, ever since I read that, I started getting into reading a lot of the trade paperbacks. It's funny because I don't actively collect issues now, but if something that interests me comes out in trade paperback, I'll read it. My favorite movie has got to be Batman Begins. Something about that movie, it came out at just the right time for me as a Batman fan.
Yes.
There hadn't been a Batman movie since Batman and Robin,
Oof.
which I didn't really like. And like even as a kid, I didn't like that movie. And it seems kind of aimed at children. But even as a kid, I'm like, well, this isn't like Batman the Animated Series. Yeah, so I'm like, when Batman Begins came out and just going through his whole origin story and the more grounded take, that was the Batman movie I needed at that time. And it still has a lot of great themes about, fear and overcoming fear that kind of arc through that whole trilogy. And yeah, no, I'm still a huge Batman fan to this day. I'm mostly a fan of the DC characters, although I do like Marvel. I kind of like Captain America because to me, he's the most DC-esque of Marvel's characters in a way, because he's very much like Superman. He's very much like this character that you look up to that I like about a lot of DC's pantheon. I think we've got a good group here, people coming from, different perspectives, different backgrounds regarding comics. And it's funny because DC, we're moving into this new era of DC films. And DC has never had like the kind of MCU kind of style that Marvel has, where they had a plan going in to build up to the Avengers. And then after that, okay, we're going to do this again. We're going to do phase 2. We're going to get into the whole Infinity Saga. But now it seems like they're kind of moving into that space. But I'd like to get your guys' take on the DC universe so far in terms of basically starting with Man of Steel up till now. What's your general opinion been of the DC films?
Ooh, well, it started out really strong for me. As far as like the DC EU, whatever you want to call it, Man of Steel, I feel is the best film that they've produced. Because that film, to me, I know that film is a little divisive, as is pretty much every film, but I think that one, it grounded Superman in such a way that kind of mirrored a little bit, how Dark Knight grounded Batman. But I felt like there was a good balance of like, well, what if an alien, superhero really landed, on Earth? I felt like that they sort of captured that concept really well, and I love Zod as a villain, and I loved, obviously Kevin Costner as Pa Kent and Russell Crowe. I thought the dynamic between his two different fathers was great, and I thought that it really nailed sort of the tone that the DCEU could kind of carry moving forward. And then things obviously got into a mess. I mean, when uh, I'm one of the more, I guess, bigger defenders of Batman v Superman, but I recognize the flaws of that film, and it's not a perfect film by any means. The ultimate cut, I think it's called. I think it's a lot better. It irons out a few things, but I mean, overall, like that, for a movie that has Batman and Superman in it, I mean, you're expecting, theoretically it should be bigger than even like Avengers, an Avengers movie, because these are the titans of comic book characters, and I think they probably rushed it. You know, what I like about DC is that they can take more risks than Marvel can, and no way am I saying the DCU is better than the MCU. The MCU triumphs DC films in every way. And if I had to pick my favorite comic book movie, it would be, Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, because it's something that's never happened in cinematic history, where you have like 20 some odd movies culminating into this one big event and really paying off. We'll probably never see it again in our lifetime. So it was really an accomplishment, and even as much as I love like The Dark Knight and Batman Begins, it doesn't accomplish what what the MCU did. But again, I mean, talking about the DC film universe, like as it stands now, like I think it's with James Gunn, and I know we're gonna get into like his slate, but all the sort of lessons learned. I mean, there were so many things that happened that like involving tragedy, like Zack Snyder's daughter, losing her life and taking her own life, and that leading to the sort of Joss Whedon Frankenstein mess of a Justice League movie that we got with the mustache mustacheless Superman. Uh, yeah, for like, how do you like, if you remember, the first shot of that movie is with Superman and that CGI'd out mustache. Like, how did they look at it? Like when they're watching the dailies and stuff, how do they look at this? Like, oh yeah, this is gonna work. Like, it was really. I mean, you could look up the behind the scenes drama behind all that, but it was had to do with the tragedy, had to do with like just the, like most movies that do poorly, studio interference is usually not a good thing. When the studio tries to take control, and I know Zack Snyder has like his sort of cult like fans, and then people that really dislike him, but I thought he did a good job with, obviously, with Man of Steel, and I thought Batman v Superman had a lot of good things going for it, but you know I'm glad he got to finish his vision. I enjoyed the Snyder cut. I don't know if you qualify that as a movie. It's more of like a, I guess, a mini series, but it's an epic. It's sort of a unique thing, right? That came onto streaming. I enjoy that a lot. I I love finally getting to see Darkseid. Um, and I thought it was really cool. But yeah, I feel like so far they have a long ways to go if they want to be considered sort of in the same light as the MCU. And I think it's a good time for them, because the MCU right now is in sort of a somewhat of a flux, where not everything they're churning out is like widely loved, and people are criticizing the MCU more than ever, and that obviously has a lot to do with after Endgame, you lose a lot of big characters and actors that have carried the MCU for 10 years, and that's to be expected. So I think it's a good time for DC films, and James Gunn and Peter Safran going forward to sort of start from a clean slate. And I think they can, again, they have the opportunity to do a lot of things differently than the MCU. And they don't have to be attached to a certain formula of how they have to do produce a movie and continue a storyline. And obviously with James Gunn having the experience that he had being a big part of the MCU, I think that's a huge advantage for them. So yeah, we'll see. I'm excited because again, uh, I'm Batman being my favorite character. I want to see as much of him on the live screen, and now that we're gonna have two Batmans in live action. That's great. I love Pattinson, and I love to see whoever they're gonna cast, and I'm excited to see the whole Damian Wayne character. I never thought I'd get to see Damian Wayne live action, so that's gonna be really cool, and yeah, hopefully they don't, you know, I like James Gunn, so I have confidence, so I'm hoping they don't mess it up, but I'm excited for what's to come.
I'm glad that they've decided to market some movies as Elseworlds, so that not all the movies have to fit, like you said, Andrew, into kind of a cookie cutter mold. That there can be some movies that are very, very different, still be vaguely part of the same DC multiverse, but can take more risks and do, crazier things. And so we can have two on live action on-screen Batmans at the same time. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, and have them be different versions of Batman.
Right.
Which is the great thing about the comic book.
Yeah.
Bringing the comic book genre into the movie realm is you can pick and choose what age am I going to bring this guy from? What storyline? Which one are we playing here?
Yeah.
I think for me, I think the DC EU is very much felt too much, too fast, and poorly done. There's been like glimmers of hope in several of them, but maybe poorly done is not the right word. Too fast, too much, and too dark.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because in my and I might be terribly wrong, but in my previous comic book collecting life, it was sort of this hierarchy. Like DC was the lightest, and then Marvel was a little darker, and then you had like Image and like some of the other stuff, and eventually that all kind of fell apart through the 90s and into the 2000s, where everybody was like on this rush to be the darkest they could be, to do these storylines. Who's going to have the most curse words and the most blood and blah blah blah. But it just felt to me like the DCU effort has been a lot darker than the Marvel.
It's wild.
And in my mind, that's never how it should be.
Right.
Like except Batman's always like the one exception.
Yeah.
And but in general, Superman is supposed to be this beacon of light, hope, and this person that people can rally around, and Wonder Woman's kind of the same way. And what I got from Man of Steel was a very conflicted Clark Kent, a very conflicted kind of Superman persona. I thought overall, Man of Steel, I would almost agree that it was the best. I don't think it was the best, but I would probably put it up there as number 2 or maybe 3, because it was at least one single storyline. It wasn't what felt like multiple movies being crammed into one, because it felt like whoever was behind, Warner Brothers or whoever's behind the DC studio was trying to catch up to Marvel. We got to have so many movies, and we got to have a big crossover event, just like Marvel's doing. And it all felt very rushed. Like Batman v Superman was about 3 movies in one. You had the buildup of Batman and Superman, and, really Batman probably should have had his own movie.
Oh yeah.
And then you had the fight should have been its own movie. Like 9 minutes was just not enough. Come on, people. It's Batman versus Superman. And then you had Doomsday stuck in there, which to me was like a gut punch.
That was unnecessary.
Right. And it was just stuck in kind of at the end of this last 10 minutes. And I'm like, what a waste. Right? This should have been the culminating event of your like 20 movie thing, and you stuck it in at like movie 2 or 3, and so that hurt. And then going into Justice League was like 5 movies jammed into one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because you had the Flash, you had Cyborg, you had those characters being introduced, bringing the guys together. You Steppenwolf, and then when you bring the Snyder cut into it, Dark Side. I mean, that's so much progression there, and I think the Snyder cut was better. I agree, but still, it was just so much in such a little space.
If anyone listening, I'm just nodding emphatically right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then we got Wonder Woman, which the first one was absolutely phenomenal.
Oh yes.
Up until the last 10 minutes. I still enjoyed the last 10 minutes. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it had to be a big fight with a god at the end. And I'm like, whatever, it was still fun.
Yeah.
But that would be my number one, would be Wonder Woman. Then I'm a big World War One. I'm a big history buff, and World War II is obviously a big one, but there's not enough focus on World War One.
I like the choice of using World War One for once. Very few people do that.
Yeah.
I like that choice.
And then Aquaman was good too, but again, it was probably 2 movies, possibly 3, because you had the storyline with the fight for ascendancy in the kingdom, and you had like the Mantis stuff going on the surface, and then you had like him taking over all the 5 kingdoms or whatever. And I'm like, you guys could have broken this up and given us more. And that would have been fine. And I see Flash coming down the line, and I'm thinking the same dang thing. I'm like, this has got to be like 3 movies.
Although everything they're saying about the Flash is that it's a really really good movie.
I hope so.
James Gunn went so far to say it's one of the best comic book movies he's ever seen, and he had nothing to do with it. I mean, he just got hired. We'll see. I mean, obviously, time will tell. I'm hoping the Flash will be like a nice, at least, sort of the last remnant of the old DCEU, and then we can look forward to. And I guess it's supposed to reset everything, right? So it's going to be technically a part of the DCU going forward as well.
Yeah, and I guess the other one is Suicide Squad, and that does worry me a little bit about James Gunn, because while I did enjoy Suicide Squad 2 more than Suicide Squad 1, it was gross. I don't know how else to put it. It was very bloody and very gross.
If James Gunn is going to do a rated R movie, you're going to get gross.
So
might want to skip Peacemaker then.
Yeah, I haven't watched Peacemaker.
I love Peacemaker, but I have more of a stomach for that stuff.
Skip Peacemaker.
Well,
man.
and the part that's sad to me is I love comedies, so I really do want to watch it. But it strikes me as maybe a little too much for me. But
I think it's safe to say all the movies on his slate
are
none of them are going to be rated R.
Not going to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then Black Adam was great, but again, it was 2 movies. The whole introduction of the Justice Society, and then the actual fight with Black Adam. I don't know. It's just it always feels like you guys could have made then they could have done it well. They could. I feel like watching the movies they made, I'm like, you guys could have made 2 to 3 more. You could have spread this out over several movies. And I believe you would have done it well, because I think the product you produced was good in its own way, but it wasn't. Come on, guys. You're just so close. You're just trying to cram too much into it. But that is the feeling in general that I have about the DC EU. And I do really hope they use this opportunity as kind of the breathing space over in the Marvel world, that it's no longer this huge pressure on them, that they can really slow down and really tell the stories of the superheroes in a compelling and awesome way, without having to crowd a bunch of events and tick a bunch of boxes and really tell the story.
Right.
So sorry, I rambled for a while there.
That's kind of what this show's about, though. This ramble about comic book movies. What about you, David? What's your take on this series so far, if we can call it a series?
The series, yeah. I'm going to reiterate what the guys have already said just a little bit. I mean, where it's just, they tried to do too much too quickly. I liked. There was, I liked Man of Steel, liked Wonder Woman, I liked Aquaman. Those were all kind of standalone movies that could build towards something else. Kind of like the first Marvel movies. Iron Man was good, but it could stand on its own. Captain America was good, could stand on its own. Thor was goofy, but could stand on its own more. Thor, we'll go on that. But most of those were all good initial ones that kind of stood on their own. They didn't okay, boom, we're gonna obviously force all these together. They kind of in Marvel, they kind of linked them all together, and if the box office didn't work, then no harm, no foul. They just wouldn't keep. But here they're like, no, like you guys said, they try to cram after the first cut. They had a couple halfway decent ones, and then okay, we're gonna accelerate and throw a whole bunch into it. It's just, there's too much too fast. There's so many great characters in DC. Just they're trying to do too many I'm a big fan of all the characters they put in the movies. They just try to put too many in at once.
Yeah.
That's the gist of it. They try to do, heck, they could have done more with Julie Andrews' character in Aquaman.
Yeah, for me, the DCEU has been very frustrating. And I think that's because of how much of a fan of the Bruce Timm, Paul Dini animated universe based off of Batman the Animated Series I am. I'm such a huge fan. To me, those are the characters. And I'm always going to judge because I came in through that avenue first rather than the comic books. I'm always going to judge. It's almost like I'm always going to judge the movies as adaptations of the animated universe rather than adaptations of the comic books. So it's especially with DC. And so it's I judge the movies based on how close the characters are to how I remember them from when I was a kid in the DC animated universe. And Patrick, yeah, I agree with you. The tone was too dark for me. I mean, I liked Man of Steel initially. I have not liked it as much on rewatch, but I did like it when I first saw it. I've liked the standalones, like David said, usually pretty well. I liked Wonder Woman. And for some reason, I really liked Aquaman.
It's fun.
And
it's fun.
I think it's just because...
Yeah, no, it is a fun movie.
It went out of its way to be a crazy comic book movie, showing you all these crazy Atlantean worlds, and Black Manta was such a stereotypical over-the-top supervillain. I just loved everything about that.
It made $1 billion.
I know, and it was great. I'm like
the highest grossing movie of the whole DCU. Crazy.
Really? Aquaman?
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on all this world building, they should have hurried up and made Aquaman 2 a lot sooner.
I agree.
Right, yeah. But it's I've been kind of frustrated with these films because of the darker tone, and because of how everything seemed rushed. When they announced that they were going to do, okay, Man of Steel, now we're doing Batman and Superman, and then Justice League. And I'm like, wait a minute. In my mind, I was like, okay, you have Superman, then you add Batman, then you have a Trinity movie with Wonder Woman, except that kind of became Batman v Superman because they introduced Wonder Woman at the end. So yeah, to me, it was the same thing. I thought they were trying to play catch up with Marvel. We need some of that Marvel money. We need to do this real fast. And I'm like, guys, no, Marvel fans stuck with it through how many movies was it until Endgame? Did we say it was
I think 23. Yeah.
23. So Marvel fans stuck with that because you guys took the time to tell a good story and to make you invested in these characters. Like you said, Patrick, with the DC movies, they're just introducing characters, and you're to the average person who's not a comic book fan, they're going to be who are you? Why should I care about you? All of a sudden in a lot of these movies, characters just pop up. I'm hopeful now that at least they have some kind of direction that they're going in, and they have a creative vision, but also it's not going to be a creative vision that's a straitjacket. because I think in his video announcing this, James Gunn said he thought it was important to give the directors a lot of creative freedom and leeway. So I actually think that's a good segue into my next question is, what do you guys think of James Gunn as being one of the leading, pioneers of this new era of DC film?
I think it's a great hire. I think I'm very glad it's not The Rock.
He's busy with football.
Well, The Rock was trying to, I guess, self-impose his himself into that sort of role. If you, I mean, I saw all the hype that was leading up to Black Adam, and I was there at Comic-Con before the movie came out, and he was all about, I forgot exactly how he worded it, but he's like, the power of the DC universe is going to shift.
Right.
Everything's going to change. Once Black Adam comes out, it's just going to be. And then you hear all these like behind the scenes stories that are coming out now. I don't know if you guys have followed any of that drama, but The Rock refused. Like, I guess he was supposed to be a big part of Shazam 2, but The Rock refused to be a part of it because he thought Shazam wasn't a big enough character, because he wanted to right away be Superman's foe. So that's why he basically forced Warner Brothers to get Henry Cavill to appear in the post-credit scene. He wanted to battle Superman. He wanted to skip the whole Shazam. Obviously, The Rock has no idea or real awareness of Shazam or Black Adam's real origins. I feel like he was just gunning for the big dogs. He's probably thinking he's The Rock. Like, who's Shazam? I got to go against Superman. Anyway, I felt like I think he felt like Black Adam was going to make $1 bajillion and then he was going to get to do whatever he wanted. Thankfully, it didn't. And so I'm happy that James Gunn was hired. I particularly like it because he is a creative himself. Like, he's a director, he's a writer. He has a lot of experience, obviously in the MCU, and he's had great success. And the first Guardians is probably still his best comic book movie, but I still enjoyed Guardians 2 very much, and I love the Christmas special that they came out with.
Oh gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So I think
Santa Claus song is such a good song.
Kevin Bacon, man.
Bacon.
He's the man.
Kevin Bacon.
So just like Kevin Feige, Kevin Feige, if you remember, he was a producer on all the older X-Men films and a lot of the comic book movies that did horribly, when comic book movies were a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Like so he got to learn from all those mistakes, and I think that's a big part of why he's been successful with the MCU. And so I think James Gunn, can be a sort of a good shepherd in that same light, where he has the experience and he's learned lessons. He did get he did get fired and then rehired by Disney. And he got to do Suicide Squad in between that. And he got to do Peacemaker. So he's been on both sides of the comic book universes. So I think that's another big advantage. And I like you mentioned, I like what he said, where he's going to allow the directors to sort of have their own vision. And what he said in that video where he announces the slate, he says that like each movie can have their own aesthetic, their own style. So I think that could set itself apart from Marvel, where all the Marvel movies look the same, aesthetically.
Yeah.
So I think that's a brilliant idea. And I also like they said that too, because as much as I love James Gunn, you don't want every movie to be like a James Gunn type of movie, because you're just gonna like what if we just get 10 straight Guardians of the Galaxy type movies like that? It's gonna get old, and it's gonna be silly, right?
You can only get so many
Yeah.
mixtapes.
Yeah.
No, I'd be happy.
So the music is great in those movies.
It is.
I mean,
Yes,
I can't argue with that. But yeah, I think I'm glad that he's writing and directing Superman. I think it'll be cool to see what his vision is for that. And yeah, I can't. I mean, the only other person you'd like to maybe see in that place is like, I don't know, like what would someone like a Steven Spielberg or a John Favreau or something do, with DC? I mean, I think James Gunn could really catapult himself if he does well, and be one of these sort of big names in Hollywood. I mean, he already is as a director, but I think as a studio head, he has a chance here to do something special. Because what DC has going for it is their rogues gallery. I think is way better than Marvel's. So I think if you can elevate that on a cinematic level, you can do something really, really special.
What do you think, Patrick? What do you think of this hire of James Gunn? Do you think it bodes well, or I think obviously the answer is yes, based on what you said about Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, it's really going to depend on if he can successfully make the transition from director to studio exec or whatever that's called, but because there's a very different like jump from director to like guy in the shadows. Like you go from being the guy who's telling everybody what to do to being the smoking man who's every once in a while you lean over the director and you're like, he's got to say this. Why? Don't worry about it.
Well, that's why I
It'll
like
come up
that.
4 movies from now.
Did you just X-Files this?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Oh my god.
Well, that's just a quick comment. That's why I like also that they didn't just hire James Gunn. They hired Peter Safran. So he's the co-head of DC Films. So that's James Gunn said himself. He's like he wouldn't have accepted the job if he had to do like all the sort of Hollywood business type stuff. He can focus on the creative, and Safran having extensive experience on the business side and the producing side, he can worry about that. So I think that also is sort of a benefit to this hire, where he can just solely focus on the storylines and the creative.
Yeah, and when you get a combo like that, when you get a really dedicated and proven out creative and a really solid businessman who both understands the business side and what he's doing, as long as they can work together, that could be a really dynamic duo.
Yeah.
If I'm going to use the the term, but they could produce a really amazing universe, right? We could really see an amazing DCU, but it all hinges on can he make, in my mind, can James Gunn make that jump to I'm not going to be the guy in the trench anymore. I'm going to be the guy kind of over the guys in the trenches, and then can he work well?
Sometimes dumping dirt back onto the guys in the trench, probably.
Right. Exactly. So, and then can they both manage the studio, right? Because, ultimately, I think one of the things that Feige and Favreau had on the Marvel side was they could manage the studios. And especially once Disney got on board, I imagine that was a much bigger fight than it used to be, because with Marvel, it was just sort of like, we tried selling our movies to Sony and to United Art and whoever out there, and it sort of worked, but it didn't work real well, and they were always just okay. Spider-Man movies did well, and X-Men was kind of and no one will pick up this Ant-Man and the Wasp movie we've been trying to sell for a decade.
Right.
And so let's do one of the off-ball ones, Iron Man, and we'll just start our own studio.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a different place when you're bought by somebody, and then you're okay. Well, Disney's now in charge of us. Now we got to deal with their executives, but we already have a proven product, and we're kind of going forward. And the DC is sort of already in house, right? It's Warner Brothers, right? It's already, and one of the 3 largest, or I think they own like a third of all media, if I remember correctly. Like they're one of the largest media clearinghouse corporations in the world, and so like, what finding those execs is like is a very different experience, because for Disney, Marvel was one of the first big, like, suddenly Disney becoming this giant media octopus that it's become. It's now one of the big 6. But Marvel was an early acquisition, so they were coming in while Disney was still, not as big as it is now, nothing near as big as it is now, and I think because of that, they were given a lot of free reign. So that to me is going to be, how much do they let James and the team off the leash, and then how well does James transition into being kind of an overhead guy? I don't know. I'm trying not to have great expectations, because I've just been so hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so far. But then again, the Batman movie,
Mm-hmm.
with Pattinson,
Phenomenal.
So
yeah.
phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Very long.
It's okay. It's okay.
Hey.
Very long.
Yeah.
Movies are just longer these
Well, it's
days. They
just-
just are.
I can only
Yeah.
I can only be dark for so long.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
can only brood for so long. I'm like the guy from the Lego movie. I like to be happy.
Everything is awesome. Please tell me that.
Thing is awesome.
So what about you, David? What's your take on James Gunn's new direction?
I think as long as he can, as long as he can really let people do their own thing, they've got a shot. Like he's had a good track record of taking kind of like Marvel, but where he's other Marvel movies like with Guardians or like the Suicide Squad or Peacemaker, he's made hits out of characters most people don't unless you're guys like me, you don't really know them that well. I mean, I knew every one of those characters, but not many people are gonna know who Javelin is or Captain Boomerang. But yeah, you can he knows how to do that, and the slate of things coming up looks like it has a good mix of the fairly familiar, but it looks like it can do something a little different, and I think that's what DC needs to do, is things a little differently. And if they're going to do interconnected things, they need to do things differently than they did before. But at the same time, it'd be good to still I hope they still keep doing one-off things. Like I liked the Batman. I know a lot of people liked that standalone Joker movie. I just don't like to go that dark. But I mean, there are so many different one-off stories that they need to give themselves the freedom to do that kind of stuff. Probably, I think.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree, and I think with this sort of Elseworlds banner that they're putting those kind of projects under,
Yes,
I think it'll work out pretty well. And then speaking of that slate, the next question I want to throw out to you guys is, of the ones that are announced in that video, which we'll probably have a link to that in the show notes so that our listeners can watch it too. But what's your most anticipated film out of that bunch? Do you guys have one?
It's got to be The Brave and the Bold for me. I mean,
Ah,
oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
That's a good bet.
being a Batman fan, and then I'm also I like the Damian Wayne character a lot from the comics. I know the general public is not too familiar with that Robin, so I think it'll be a nice sort of introduction to the Bat family. Yeah, I never thought we would get to see a Robin other than Dick Grayson, as far as the movies are concerned. And so I'm hoping that in the Pattinson Bat universe, maybe we'll get a Dick Grayson there. But so I'm sure Dick Grayson will probably be Nightwing at this point, in The Brave and the Bold. So again, another amazing character that we'll get to see.
My gosh,
so
yeah.
that has a lot going for it. I love the Grant Morrison run that it seems to be inspired by. I've collected a lot of those comics, and yeah, I think I'll be excited to hear like who ends up, being director, who's writing it, who's gonna be this DCU Batman. I mean, and other than that, I love Swamp Thing. I love Alan Moore's run. So I'm very much, and James Mangold is one of my favorite living directors. So I mean, he hit it out of the park with Logan. It looks like his Indiana Jones movies it looks really good. So as far as the trailers are concerned, so Disney and Lucasfilm have so much confidence in him that they gave him a Star Wars movie as well that they just announced at Celebration. So him officially announcing that he's currently writing Swamp Thing, has me excited for it. So I know I kind of cheated and picked two, but those are
That's cool, yeah.
And then I mean Superman Legacy, just curious to see what James Gunn's vision is for Superman. I'll throw that in there too. But yeah, a lot of interesting properties on there, stuff that I'm not even that familiar with. I know nothing about Creature Commandos, but that looks cool. You know, I think doing a Themyscira prequel series sounds good. Booster Gold can be fun. I think I just announced most of the slate, but but
Yeah.
Brave and the Bold, yeah, obviously for me, if I had to pick one, this is what I'm looking forward to.
I'll limit it to the one I've seen trailers for, so not very many. But between the two, between the Flash and the Blue Beetle, I'm much more looking forward to the Blue Beetle.
Oh, okay. Cool.
As interesting as the Flash looks, especially with Michael Keaton coming back as Batman, it again just feel like it's yelling at me like I'm a forced movie that's full of 3 movies really, and and I'm a rush job to copy something that was done on the MCU side with the Spider-Man No Way Home, with bringing the alternate Spider-Mans in on the same thing, which was just so amazing. And I would love to see all the Batmans to get together. That would be pretty fun.
Oh, that would be my dream movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I could die happy.
Yeah. Can't do Adam West anymore, unfortunately, but all the rest of them.
I don't know, with all the new deep fake stuff that they're doing in the movies.
Oh no.
Yeah, they could Tarkin him, right? Grand Moff Tarkin.
And that would be easy. It would be easier to do him because most of the face would be hidden by that.
That would just hurt. That would hurt. I'm sorry. I just couldn't do that.
I just feel like that's so disrespectful.
Get the West family's blessing first. But I would not be opposed to AI generated Adam West voice.
Adam West. Talking with Michael Keaton, talking with George Clooney, talking with Batman. Anyways.
He just randomly does the Bat-Tusi while everyone's fighting.
Yes, yeah.
Come on. That would be phenomenal.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I really am. I'm having watched the Blue Beetle trailer.
That looked cool, yeah. That looks good.
Because he's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to steal that. I'm more looking for it's not on the Gods and Monsters, but I'm looking forward to Jaime Reyes.
Cobra Kai is
Blue
great.
Beetle.
He's great.
Because like I said, I was I'm used after one of my favorite Justice League comics was Blue Beetle. It was the Justice League with Blue Beetle and Booster Gold. So I want to see Jaime. I want to see as it's a different Blue Beetle, but I want to see this Blue Beetle movie. I want to see Booster Gold because Booster Gold is basically he's the epitome of imposter syndrome, where he's just trying to become So I'm so looking forward to those.
I think on my end, I am excited for Batman Brave and the Bold, but I'm also really excited for Superman Legacy because I'm really ready for another Superman that kind of gets Superman back to more of that kind of character that everyone can look up to, rather than him being a kind of conflicted character or turned evil for some reason. I just think that sometimes a lot of these writers and producers don't know what to do with Superman because maybe, I don't know if it's because they don't really believe in what Superman represents anymore, or they're just too jaded and but Marvel has proven with Captain America that kind of character can work and audiences will love it.
Absolutely.
So
you can be a good guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Just be a good guy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And and James Gunn is going to have that authority movie where he can do all of the dark and cynical, conflicted superheroes. But I just want Superman to be Superman and embrace everything what makes that character amazing. And oh my gosh, yeah. And I hope that eventually they bring his son into it, because when they introduced in the when they did DC Rebirth and they introduced Superman's son, he was one of my favorite new characters. And especially when they paired him up with Damian.
Yeah.
Because he's the ultimate foil for Damian.
Absolutely.
And it was perfect. But yeah, I definitely want to see what they do with Superman in this universe. And I'm excited for that Lanterns show.
That's
That might force me to get HBO Max because
the concept of that show sounds really cool.
Yes. Yeah, and I love that it's both Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart, because the Jon Stewart Green Lantern was the one from the animated Justice League that I grew up with. So I'm like, he's kind of like my Green Lantern. So I'm like, and I like the idea of having them be a cop show. Just like it almost sounds kind of like maybe a grittier Men in Black, because they're cops looking for alien activity on Earth and something, and that could be really cool. So I'm definitely excited for that. Some of the things that they've talked about have me a little like, I don't know, that Supergirl movie just sounds like they're going dark again with a Superman family character, and I'm just like, why? But we'll see. I'm open. They said it's going to be like kind of a big sci-fi epic production, and I'm into that. So
the Tom King comic that it's inspired by is really, really good. If you ever read it,
okay, because I haven't read that yet.
it's really
So-
good. It is. There are a lot of dark aspects to it. It's a more sort of tortured Supergirl, but it's, in contrast to Superman, who had like wonderful parents on Earth. Yeah.
I mean,
So
yeah, that
it's
makes
kind of
sense.
but it's a really good story. If it's anything like the comic, I think it could end up being a good movie.
And that's kind of like Tom King's bread and butter now, is to do those kind of tortured, damaged characters.
He's good at it.
He's
yeah.
good at it.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite writers, but he's good at that. Yeah.
So the last question I want to throw out to you guys is a fun one, and that if you could have any dream DC live action adaptation, what would it be?
Oh boy.
Wow, that's everyone's gonna be like,
Yeah.
I know
Thomas, you might
there's
have to
so
start
many.
us off with that.
I'll go first because mine is a little bit out there.
Yeah, please, yes.
But I love this comic and I love the animated adaptation. I want Batman TMNT
Oh my gosh, yes.
in live action.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh, that was
Yes.
yeah. That would, yeah,
Those
be
were some of
hilarious.
my favorite comic books of the last 10 years. The animated movie is in my top 3 superhero animated movies. I love that movie. And I just want to see, the 10-year-old in me needs this movie. Needs it. So that's my pick. Live action Batman TMNT for the win.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I could easily say Dark Knight Returns, like let's say years from now, whoever's playing Batman, once he's old and grizzled, if we could have like or like we can get like Michael Keaton to play him now, like an old grizzled
Right.
Batman
Yeah.
doing that Dark Knight Returns story, which there's shades of it in Batman v Superman, but it really wasn't telling that story. But I would also love to see a Batman Beyond movie. Again, something you could easily do with like a Michael Keaton now, or a really good older actor. Because I mean, Batman Beyond, other than Batman the animated series, Batman Beyond is like one of my favorites as well. It could really translate well to film, because you could obviously the future that's depicted in Batman Beyond it's kind of like very like a little dated now. It's more kind of cyberpunkish.
It's
Yeah,
like Blade Runner.
Yeah. But I think you could do something really cool. Like,
Yeah, yes.
you could find like a Blade Runner 2049 sort of aesthetic, or something, something crazy. Like get a director like a Denis Villeneuve who's very visual and can paint like a future that looks really cool. And I think seeing an old grizzled Batman being a mentor to a younger one would be really cool. So I would that I hope I get to see a Batman Beyond movie in my lifetime. That would be really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I want them to do the whole Death of Superman, Funeral for a Friend, Superman Returns, all that. I want all that done well. That's what I want.
Mhm.
I want
Well,
I want it done well. You know? That's really, I mean, as far as on the DC side of the ball, that is what I want. Live action. Yeah, there's not much else I could say really. I mean, there's so many good, I don't know, call them pocket universe stories in the DC, like where they just ran with this, like, what if this were true? And then they ran with it and made just amazing storylines. But I really would like to see Death of Superman done well.
So what about you, David? Do you have one?
I was thinking about this. Out of all the characters, one I haven't mentioned, or mentioned just briefly, they've never really done him outside of animated. But I think they could, if it was done right, I think they could do a lot with Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
If they did it right.
Love that character.
Because there was an animated movie called New Frontier.
Yes.
DC New Frontier.
Yeah.
They featured him in there, where it's like, you know, he's almost as powerful as Superman, but you know, Batman's just like, all I need is a penny for a book of matches to take you out. But he's this guy who has to adapt to the world and hide out and be, you know, blend in, and he could take, man, he has all of those, he could have all those elements of so many good story elements as an outsider looking in. But he's never really been tackled. Or the only time they tried to tackle him was in a terrible Justice League pilot, which had the guy from Winchester, the guy who played Winchester from MASH as him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it did not go well. But you know, he's been in the Arrow, what's called the Arrowverse, and I thought they did a pretty good job with him there. So why not the movies? I think they could do it. I think the technology is finally good enough.
Oh yeah, absolutely agree. And he's such a great character. And yeah, he's almost like, yeah, I definitely think he's on my short list of Justice League characters who I really want to see make the transition live action.
They could even work in his fascination with Oreos.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
His whole thing where he's addicted to Oreos during one series. So,
and that's a great thing about the DC universe. It's so diverse. It's so filled with so many eclectic characters, everything ranging from like street level dark vigilantes like Batman to aliens from outer space to people from the future. What the freaking what are they? The Legion of Superheroes. Imagine that movie.
Oh man,
that could be insane. Yeah, there's so much untapped potential here, and you know, I'm glad that they're starting to expand out a little bit from just Batman and Superman to really explore the kind of frontiers of the DC universe and bringing in all these awesome characters. But yeah, and I can't wait to see where James Gunn and his partners are going to take us next in this awesome universe. But that'll about do it for us on this inaugural episode of Comics and Coffee. But before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make all our shows here at StarQuest possible, including Tim D, Sean F, John C, Patrick, and Mike and Angie G. Their generous donations help us to continue to create the secrets of movies and TV shows, and you can join them at sqpn.com/give. But now we'd like to hear from you, our listeners. What's your favorite comic book movie? Are you excited for the future direction of the DC films? You can let us know on our Facebook page or on Twitter, or you can send an email to secrets@sqpn.com, or you can visit our channel on the StarQuest Discord server at sqpn.com/discord. Until next time, Pat Mason, thank you for joining me on Comics and Coffee.
Great being here. Wonderful conversation.
Thank you. And Andrew Hermiz, thank you as well.
Thanks again. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more of these.
And David Handlos, thank you too.
Thank you very much. This has been fun.
Until next time, I'm Thomas Salerno, and thank you for joining us on the secrets of movies and TV shows on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy, The Secrets of Stargate. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Stargate.